Good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on where this event finds you. I'm Clarissa Rios Rojas from the Biological Weapons Convention Implementation Support Unit, and I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to this event. Please notice that this event is being recorded and it's going to be available online in due course. This is the third event in a series of technical briefs on emerging technologies and the Biological Weapons Convention, which is co-organized by the BWC Implementation Support Unit and the UN Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR. And this series aims to foster science diplomacy by bringing together technical experts, diplomats, and practitioners to provide clear policy-relevant insights to support ongoing working group discussions. So the event today is going to focus on frontier AI developments and how they may affect the implementation and future effectiveness of the convention. The discussion will focus on concrete challenges for the BWC, but also practical implementation-oriented pathways rather than just abstract technological trends. So in order to explore this issue, we have a conversation with 4 experts. And throughout the event, we welcome input from all of you using the Q&A function, which can be found at the bottom of your screens. Your questions and comments will be treated as anonymous, and we will post them to the speakers to enrich the discussion. So to get us started, I will ask our panelists to introduce yourselves. Who are you and what is your connection to frontier AI? So let's start with you, Friederike.
Hello, thank you very much, Clarissa. And yeah, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone online. My name is Friederike Große-Holz, and I lead the workstream on tech policy and international at the AI safety unit of the European Commission's AI office. I will say a little bit more about this body later. We supervise and enforce the European Union's rules for providers of the most advanced AI models, and I'm joining you from Brussels today. That is also my connection to advanced AI. On top of that, I have a background in biotechnology. I did a PhD on biotech back in the day. So the intersection between AI and bio is really where my heart beats, so to say.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Brian.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, Clarissa. My name is Brian Jie, and I am the founder and CEO of Concord AI. We are a not-for-profit social enterprise dedicated to mitigating global scale risk from frontier AI, and we have offices in Beijing and Singapore. Since 2025, we have prioritized the nexus of AI and biosecurity, addressing the unique challenges that this convergence could pose to global security. In general, our theory of change centers on 3 pillars. One is industry governance, where we engage with the AI industry to implement best practices in AI safety and governance. Second, national policy, engaging in national standards and also policymaking with evidence-based research. And then finally, multilateral engagement, where we foster international dialogue and understanding through track 2 dialogues and other activities, with a particular focus on the role of China in the global AI ecosystem. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Brian. Hamza, over to you.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me. As you can tell from the sun slowly rising in my background, I'm the earliest morning attendee here. I'm based in DC. I lead the Future of Life Institute's AI and national security portfolio, which is a mixture of work around grant making, education and coalition building, communication and advocacy, both with elite media and with the public, and then lots of policy work focused in the EU, where we have half a dozen folks focused on the EU AI Act and the codes of practice. Another half a dozen people focused on UN and global governance across both military use cases like autonomous weapons, as well as civilian use cases. And then within the US policy team where I'm based, I lead our national security efforts, which is across 4 verticals. The first being around responsible AI military adoption, including nuclear command and control. The second being securing software and hardware. The third being mitigating proliferation threats, in particular, those threats coming from biology and from cybersecurity. And then finally, on AI and geopolitics, pushing for responsible cooperation between the CCP and the United States. That's me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Hamza. Cecile?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sasela Bungu. I'm a PhD student at the University of Cambridge, a research affiliate with the Institute of Law and AI, and a research affiliate with the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge. I've been working on AI governance for about five years now, and my work has been a lot of my work has touched on global South countries and what they should be doing about advanced AI. I've published a bunch of papers on this. I've been involved in some policy processes, and I've also advised lots of people who are also working on this. Yeah. So yeah, I'm very glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to the session. Thank you.
Thank you to you all. So I think that as an opening question will be, what will be one fact or insight that should make our audience pay attention to frontier AI? So let's start in the same order. Friederike?
Yeah. I'm going to take a little bit of liberty here, but I think one factor insight that should really make the audience pay attention here is that of how frontier AI rules are shaping up in the European Union and what it actually needs to follow through on enforcing these rules. And this is to be learned from examples only because the European AI Act is the world's first binding law for frontier AI. So we do not have any experience with enforcing that yet. We can only learn from other European Union legislation and from how enforcement around that has gone. And most notably, one can look at the Digital Services Act. This is a regulation that deals with how platforms work on the web, such as X, for instance. And there was a recent fine against X by the European Commission. And if you sort of look at the conversation around that and how deeply political that conversation is and how much it actually happens in the public sphere before the commission then goes through and finds the provider, you can sort of start to glimpse what frontier AI enforcement will necessarily need to look like. And you can thereby also see the role for expert communities and for international organizations such as the BWC in ensuring that the rules that are laid down actually carry weight in the end of the day, because only what makes it into the public light and only what has political interest and pressure behind it gets enforced in the end of the day. So that's going to be my fact on frontier AI. Look at the recent X case and start to imagine how political enforcement will be and sort of see your role and the role that the BWC could play there.
Thank you, Frederic. Brian?
So over the last few years, AI developers have continued to train larger and more capable frontier AI models. And according to the latest International AI Safety Report 2026 that was just released a few days ago, we can see that frontier AI is lowering the technical barrier for less resource actors to design and plan potential biological threat. Concord AI also did a research study with Shanghai AI Lab in summer 2025. And we found that 18 of the leading large language models were able to exceed human experts in their depth of hazardous biological knowledge. And then more recently, we have also built a frontier AI risk monitoring platform, which evaluates over 50 models on their ability to troubleshoot real-world wet lab protocols. And we found that several of the leading reasoning models, such as OpenAI O3, now surpass the performance of most PhD-level virologists, at least in terms of open source benchmarks. At the same time, though, our in-house safety testing shows that fewer than 10% of the models reliably refuse biological malicious requests for over 80% of the time. And some models are even able to comply with 95% of malicious prompts, just providing expert level instructions to anyone who asks. So it shows that there is a rising level of expert level capability, but the safeguards have been lacking so far.
Thank you. Over to you, Hamza.
Yeah, this won't neatly segue into my presentation, but I think the most important fact is that our ability to secure AI software and hardware is massively outpaced by how quickly AI is advancing. So whether you care about AI in a proliferation context where you can design biological design tools, whether you care about AI in a distribution context where you want to make sure all countries have access to these AI models, whether you care about international treaties between AI great powers, all of that is downstream of our capacity to make sure that software and hardware is secured. And we're several years behind that effort currently.
Thank you. And you, Cecil?
Yeah, so a couple of days ago, Anthropic researchers published this paper on the impact that AI is having on skill formation. In summary, I think the fact that should catch our eye is something like it looks like the more the use is, the less the more the skills are like lost, quote unquote. And they complete it by talking about what this might mean for safety critical infrastructure, safety critical domains, and I think that should concern all of us. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And because, as I mentioned before, this is our third event, we already received feedback from the first and second. And for this event, we ask our experts to think about one challenge for the BWC and then come up with a potential solution or potential pathway that the BWC, the convention, can follow through. And we are going to start now with Frederic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen so that folks online can hopefully see the slides. That should not be the case now. Wonderful. So thank you so much for giving me the floor. I'll run through a brief introduction of who we are at the AI office, what we do, and then one challenge for the BWC and how I propose to address it. While obviously stating that all of this is my personal views, none of this is the official position of the European Commission. Great. So with that out of the way, the European Commission's AI office is a quite big organization. As you can see, we have a pretty broad mandate to look into implementation of the AI Act, especially as it concerns general purpose AI models, which is the European Union's way to say the most like frontier AI, basically. But also to foster research and innovation and to represent the EU on AI matters internationally. So there's a broad remit. I'm going to really focus in today on the unit that I co-founded just about a year and a half ago when I joined the Commission, coming from the UK AI Safety Institute. I joined the EU Commission as the second employee in this little blue box here, which by now has grown to healthy double-digit numbers of people and is continuing to grow. But what we're basically building here is the AI safety unit within the AI office. And that unit is tasked with supervising and enforcing the European Union's rules for providers of the most advanced of these general purpose AI models. Now, brief background on what these rules are. The AI Act itself is very, very high level here. It has some obligations in Article 55, the most important one here for today being to assess and mitigate possible systemic risks. And then it obviously is a question of what does assess and mitigate mean and what does systemic risk mean. This has been to some extent answered through a code of practice. The code of practice is a tool that shows providers how they can comply with these obligations and was published last summer. That was the first task of our unit, basically to facilitate the drawing up of this code. And the code includes specified systemic risks, such as risks from enabling chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear attacks. So here you have biosecurity, or the intersection between AI and biosecurity, very clearly spelled out in the law and the guidance that helps to implement it. So there's a pretty clear mandate for the AI office to work with providers of the most advanced models, and that would include, for avoidance of doubt, signatories to this code of practice, such as Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, but also companies that did not sign the code will need to comply with this obligation to assess and mitigate systemic risks. And that includes, for instance, Meta. In short, any provider of one of the most advanced models, once that model is on the European market, must comply with these obligations, and it's our role to supervise and enforce these rules. Now, where's the role for the BWC here? To know whether risk has been sufficiently mitigated at union level. This is how we talk about risk from our perspective. The AI office will need to rely on internal and external monitoring. So we have some, very few, experts on AI bio in-house, but we cannot do it all. And importantly, we also need to rely on external expertise to make solid arguments and to make it clear that this is not just a power grab by the commission. If we go out and tell a provider, hey, you have to do X, Y, Z. No, it is actually based on external scientific evidence. And hence we rely on external risk monitoring to make sure that providers actually mitigate risks from the misuse of AI in biology. Another thing that we do is that we feed in on other commission files. So in the commission speak, anything that might become a law at some point is called a file at the start. And we tend to be asked whenever it's about frontier AI, because our AI safety unit is pretty unique within the commission, in that we have managed to hire, as I was saying, dozens of technical experts, with PhDs in AI or with experience at major providers. We've had people join us from Google and Meta, for instance. And so we have become a hub of expertise, and we often get pulled in to say, look, is there a risk that we need to mitigate here, or also which mitigations might actually work? And then again, we can do some of this internally, and we can track risks and work with stakeholders to propose mitigating actions. But we must rely on external subject matter expertise to establish which mitigations should be put forward, which ones are effective, because we simply don't have the mandate or the staff to assess which biosecurity mitigations now need to be put in place because AI is progressing the way it's doing, right? So again, we rely on external expertise a fair bunch. And then finally, my challenge for the BWC that comes from all of this is basically a call to do more and maybe a bit differently. What is happening anyway is the biosecurity relevant risk monitoring and developing and assessing mitigation approaches for this intersection between AI and biology. Because, as I said, this external expertise is pivotal for us to be able to actually make the rules stick. And as I said in my initial fact, enforcement is tremendously political and very much shaped by public debate. So we need this expertise, and we need this risk monitoring and assessments of mitigations and suggestions for effective mitigations in the public domain, and backed by highly renowned international organizations such as the BWC and others, because that is the only way we will be able to argue that an enforcement case needs to be brought forward. The provider needs to be obliged to do these things, right? In whatever we do to enforce the law, we always face the trade-off of, do we place this burden on the provider and thereby, frankly, make the union market a bit less attractive? Or do we not place that burden and accept the risk? And here, if you really think certain biosecurity relevant risks are big enough that they warrant mitigation, that information needs to be brought to the European Commission in a way that puts political pressure to actually use the enforcement tools. Otherwise, the law will be there, but will not necessarily have teeth. So what I'm essentially calling you to do, if you allow me to be a little bit figurative, is build a monitoring mechanism that gives teeth to the AI Act and to other international regulation, right? This is not just about the EU. This is about any case in which the evidence and the sort of stamp of approval of international expertise can help policymakers to do the right thing. And I think it's often underappreciated how much conversation and political pressure and external expert push is really needed to make that happen. So if you wanted to do that, super brief recommendation is basically build a monitoring function that has expertise across science, regulation, law, economics. This will likely not just be a scientific question. This will intersect with other disciplines. Ensure that there's sufficient depth so that benefits from a stable small group setup. One thing that we learned from this code of practice drawing up is that novel ideas or ambitious proposals just take repeated trusted interaction. The code of practice was not written by people who meet once a year for 5 hours. It was written by a group of chairs who came together for hundreds and hundreds of hours over the course of a year, and still presumably, arguably didn't have enough interaction with each other. So it is really key to make sure that people have more than just a few hours to spend together to hash out proposals that can actually work for the multiple stakeholders that they need to work for. And then some sort of disclaimers here. I think this goes pretty closely to what you are planning to do anyway. It just gives it a bit of a different flavor, because I'm saying you need expertise that cuts across science, regulation, law, and economics. And it needs this small group stable setup. And the final point is like, look, this doesn't need to call out specific companies or nations as the sort of bad guy. For instance, the EU AI office actually has a mandate to investigate systemic risk at union level. So even if there was just a communication, a paper, an expert input, whatever shape it takes, that says, look, there is increased risk of such and such scenario because of the advances in AI, and these mitigations might actually work and they're not being taken, that is enough. There's no need to point out specific actors. That is the job of the enforcer, and we can be the bad cop here. There's no need for an external to do that. It's just the need to, monitor the risk and communicate about these risks, and then engage relevant actors as appropriate. And that includes us in the European AI office. It includes the colleagues in the US that are now enforcing SB 53, and others if the RAISE proposal in New York goes through, for instance. So you have these policymakers and you have the chance to give them teeth. Provide them with the evidence that they need. Thank you very much. That's my last slide. You have a QR code here where you can look at the relevant documents for the European setup, and also happy to chat if anyone's interested in that.
Thank you so much, Friederike. I think what this highlights for our discussions under the BWC is that risk-based upstream oversight of general purpose AI systems can offer useful points of reflection for prevention and implementation without implying a regulatory role for the convention itself. And I'm sure that many people in our audience would like to discuss the pros and cons. And thank you so much. I go to Brian for your presentation now. Thank you. Were you able to share, Brian, or shall
Sorry,
we?
could someone else go first? It seems like mine is not working.
Of course. Hamza, would you be okay to go?
Yeah, of course. Please, would you mind sharing my slides? Perfect. I'm going to be talking about a very narrow slice of the AI and biological landscape, which I feel like has come up fairly rarely in the working group consultations, in discussions with respect in the EU AI Act and the codes of practice, and also in discussions here in DC. And that's basically how AI and malign influence threats, essentially informational threats, intersect with our understanding of general biological threats. Next slide. I would keep going. Next slide. One more. Perfect. So The current state of AI bio threat assessments at a very high level is the following, which is often what we're trying to do is find out what the AI uplift is. In other words, what can models do that other tools can't, whether that's search engines or general academic knowledge or working with people in groups. And generally speaking, most AI and bio threat assessments can be bucketed into two. The first is AI uplift that reduces technological barriers. And this has classically been where most of our attention has been focused. So technological barriers are the literal scientific know-how and access to scientific tools that allow you to synthesize, deploy, weaponize a pathogen. Recently, thankfully, we've also expanded our understanding of how we think about threat assessments, where we're not just focused on literally the technology or literally the scientific know-how, but also focused on how AI can help with operational barriers. Operational barriers tend to be those which are focused on the literal organizational aspects of what a group needs in order to commit an attack. So, as I will get into, it's going to be things like planning, it's going to be things like recruiting, it's going to be things like financing. There's lots of things, in other words, which go into committing an AI-powered bio attack, which isn't just procuring the pathogen, but also everything that goes around it. And within this context of operational barriers, you can broadly think of AI bio threats in two ways. The first is that there's things that AI models can help with left of boom, as we say in the nuclear space. And left of boom is all the things which go into a kill chain or a threat assessment, which are before the attack is committed, before the pathogen is deployed. And then there's many things that you can do right of boom after the attack. And my thesis here is that we tend to focus a lot more still on left of boom threat assessments and less on right of boom threat assessments. Next slide. Perfect. So this is classically where the vast majority of work in AI biothreat assessments is still focused. So whether you're looking at the UK AI Security Institute, Casey in the United States, you're looking at the EU AI Act's implementation office, a lot of it's very focused on how much can AI models help with several scientific barriers, in particular pathogen identification and selection, biological engineering and synthesis, weaponization, pretty important, laboratory capabilities, and then counter detection. These are the five things essentially that you kind of need in order to make sure that you have the sufficient scientific know-how and scientific access to deploy a pathogen. Next slide. Now, thankfully, especially over the past year, and I think the UK Security Institute in particular has been leading this effort, but there's many other domestic and regional organizations thinking about this more. People have woken up to the fact that AI models aren't just helping you in narrow scientific ways, but they're also helping you with things which are just fundamentally informational. At the same time, we've also seen, to Frederica's point, an expansion of the number of teams working on this, where it's not just epidemiologists or people coming from molecular biology background, but it's people coming from a counter-terrorist background or people coming from a diplomacy background. And those folks will tell you that if any non-state actor wants to launch a pathogen, they need a lot more than just the scientific know-how and scientific tools. So based off of that evolving understanding of both the models and the threats, we've seen a lot more research now on how AI can help overcome operational barriers. And in my mind, these are covered in sort of five buckets: personnel and organization. How do you get people and how do you make sure that you work with them? Financing, you need money to commit an attack. You need money to do everything. Procurement and logistics. How do you literally create the infrastructure needed to get something like a pathogen? Target access and deployment. How much a pathogen can cause damage depends on where it's deployed. And that's where AI models can be quite effective. And then finally, pre-attack OPSEC. The most critical period for any non-state actor to commit an attack is the 24 hours before the attack. And that's when they're most likely to be apprehended. And AI models can help them evade justice in that critical window. So at the high level, we're now doing a lot of work on operational barriers, but I think there's still one big gap missing. Next slide. What is missing? Next slide. Which is what happens right of boom, which is what we can do after the attack. Next slide. So I've particularly been thinking over the past couple of months about AI-enabled influence attacks. So all of us are fairly familiar that AI poses a massive informational threat. It can get people to not show up to the polls because they believe that there's a local attack that happened next to the ballot box. It can get people to fall in love with large language models in certain psychosis contexts. It can influence people's economic, social, and political opinions writ large. And the gap I'm identifying is the growing research on longitudinal influence and psychosis being linked to how we think about biological threats. So once we start linking those two, once an adversary or a non-state actor has committed the exploit, has launched the pathogen, I believe that AI-enabled influence attacks affect our biothreat assessments in 5 ways. First, attribution avoidance, making it just unclear to figure out who was responsible. Imagine an attack being launched in some war zone where the most effective thing to do is to just muddy the waters. So you don't know if it was the government launching it or some other non-state actor, or if it was launched by one of your own, as it were. False flag operations are another way to avoid attribution, where you can just claim that this is an attack coming from the government as a ruse or as some kind of remit to expand their control. Information control, very, very critical, which is to the extent that that pathogen is now spreading and there's infections. You really want to make sure that people have access to PPE, people are adhering to non-pharmaceutical interventions. But what you can do is just completely sever that response by making sure that you're telling people vaccines don't work, or vaccines are themselves a tool of exploitation, or by social distancing, you'll be the victim of some other harm. So, and then finally, escape and evasion, which is by muddying the water so much on attribution and response, you can just make sure that non-state actors or state actors are not held responsible. And hence, AI-enabled influence operations target all of these. They make attribution impossible, they paralyze response, they prevent recovery, and they undermine accountability. So hopefully, in the past 60 seconds, I've kind of tentatively demonstrated that there is a big gap in how we think about AI and biological threat assessments. And now, in conclusion, I'm just going to talk about how that intersects with the Biological Weapons Convention. Next slide. Yeah, so the BWC has done lots of interesting work around attribution, verification, scientific cooperation, and crisis response. And Article 6 explicitly talks about in Article 5 do consultation and complaints of violations depend on accurate attribution. And my claim here is if AI informational threats make attribution impossible, compliance mechanisms will falter. Similarly, there's lots of discussion for the past years around a verification mechanism, and the working group will discuss compliance and verification mechanisms. And I claim that AI influence operations could make a verification regime unworkable for the same reasons as it would for attribution. Third, and I think this is pretty critical, Article 10 promotes international cooperation, which I think is a good thing for peaceful users. But AI-enabled influence operations could systematically destroy that trust. If there's a pathogen launched in some region which is in conflict, making attribution impossible means that you can't trust any state actor there, which I think would be a big problem for especially North-South and South-North cooperation. And then finally, crisis response paralysis. The BWC historically has done a good job working with the WHO and other parts of the United Nations to make sure that when there's a naturally occurring or deliberate pathogen being released, it's important for us to have a coordinated international response. That again becomes very difficult when no one knows what happened, who did it, and what to do about it. And next slide. So the basic claim I'm making is across our science and tech development monitoring, across our S&T advisory mechanism, and across efforts for the BWC on international cooperation, it is critical for us to start thinking about informational threats. Classically, what happens, including in the International AI Safety Report that Brian referred to in his introduction, is that the influence and informational section is radically different from the biological and chemical weapons section. And this doesn't make sense. We have to collapse that compartment and make sure that we're treating influence and informational threats as a key part of thinking about any of these other proliferation threats, including biological weapons. Second, on that, as Frederica said, it's very important for us to expand our net of experts who come in for these consultations. We can't just be talking to epidemiologists or national security experts. We have to talk to people who've been working on information threats on foreign malign influence, who rarely tend to be at these kinds of discussions. So that would be my overall recommendation, and I'm happy to get into this in Q&A as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamza. Of course, I mean, it's quite clear that AI enable influence and information operations could affect attribution, consultation, and response mechanisms under the convention, which raise questions about how the effectiveness of the BWC can be maintained in practice. So thank you so much for that. Brian, we go to you now. We can see it now. You're muted.
Can everyone see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much for giving me the floor. So I'm going to talk about the emerging trends and risk from frontier AI, and then wrap up with one recommendation. So over the last 2 years, we have seen that there is increasing calls from global experts and policymakers in both the AI and the life sciences community regarding the risk at their intersection. And in terms of, and in terms of the first threat, we can see that AI could lower the barrier for less sophisticated actors to plan and design dangerous biological agents, at least at a scientific level. And as I mentioned earlier, it does this by outperforming human experts in areas like mastery of knowledge and also in this ability to troubleshoot complex web lab protocols. And because of this, within the last 6 months, we have seen that several leading AI companies have now classified their own models as having crossed a higher biological risk threshold. And taking a precautionary approach, these models are now on the verge of being capable of having a novice plan and design a dangerous biological attack, at least in the earlier phase of threat modeling. The second threat moves beyond what is already known, is that AI could raise the ceiling on what is possible, helping to design pathogens that are more dangerous than anything that nature or humans have yet produced. For example, the AI tool EV-Escape can predict viral evolution with stunning accuracy. It correctly predicted 66% of SARS-CoV-2 variants, compared to just 70% for older methods. While, of course, this can accelerate beneficial vaccine development, it could also be misused to engineer viruses that evade our human immunity. And this capability to generate novelty is also seen in AI systems that are trained on DNA and data. Researchers have been able to jailbreak these models for 60% of the time, essentially tricking these models into generating pathogen-like sequences, including several novel cases. In fact, a global database of over 360 biological AI models found that fewer than 3% have any form of misuse prevention built in. Examples would include safety evaluations, access controls, or filtering of training data. The final and the third threat is that AI could potentially reduce the effectiveness of current biosecurity and biodefense measures. For example, synthesis screening can act as a critical choke point to prevent the physical manufacturing of hazardous genetic sequences. But this defense currently relies on matching sequences to known threats. AI could be used to design novel sequences that perform a hazardous function, but are different enough to go undetected. In other words, the current list of regulated agents and toxins might fail to detect the possible new or modified pathogens that are designed by future biological AI models. And so to ensure that the convention remains future-proof, we have to consider how frontier AI and the convergence of the life sciences could intersect and impact some of these BWC obligations. Now, I'm not an expert in these specific obligations, but to just provide a few thoughts for consideration. For instance, under Article 3, how would we redefine intangible transfers? Traditional controls rely on the transfer of physical pathogens and equipment, but if an AI model can troubleshoot a complex protocol or suggest workarounds for high consequence synthesis, does this constitute a transfer of assistance that are currently prohibited under Article 3? And we have to generally consider at what point a general purpose model becomes a specialized means of delivery for restricted biological expertise. So one primarily safety by design intervention would be a proactive filtering of training data, removing high consequence and dual-use biological sequences before AI model is ever trained. So in terms of national frameworks, one example is the China's TC260 AI Safety and Governance Framework, which provides a reference for implementation. It explicitly warns that a training data set that is broadly trained on CBRN data could also, lead to proliferation of catastrophic knowledge or even lead to the failure of existing international controls. And therefore, it recommends that developers filter out these chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear data from the pre-training data set. There's also some industry cases where the developers of EVO2, a biological AI model, proactively excluded viral sequences affecting humans from their training data sets to prevent the model from learning how to write human pathogens, essentially. There's also research from the UK AI Security Institute suggesting that data curation and filtering remains one of the most effective safeguards, including both proprietary models as well as open source models. So one recommendation is that state parties can contribute to this collective effort by identifying and also securing sensitive biological data within their jurisdictions. By ensuring that these publicly available datasets do not host high consequence information for biological and pathogen synthesis, we can then prevent the learning of biothreats at the source of AI models. And of course, to do this well and effectively, we have to collaborate across borders to establish clear technical boundaries on what types of biological data would be too high risk for unrestricted AI training. And I think that could be a vital modern component of our collective obligation to prevent the development of biological weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Of course, the point that stands out here is that many of the most consequential prevention measures now sit well upstream of weaponization in areas as data curation, model training, synthesis screening, which may influence how state parties at the convention think about prevention and compliance. Now we have Cecil, over to you.
Thank you. Nice. Next slide, please. Right. So I'm going to be talking about Global South countries and what sort of role they have in all of this, and specifically Article 10 and how it can be brought to life given the opportunities and risks that are at play. So I guess first I'll start with why this matters. As has been shown by all those speakers who've come before me, the risks are real and they are serious. And we have had a history of biological weapons being used, often in ways that particularly disadvantage Global South countries. I guess there hasn't been too much of a discussion on the opportunities, but I think there's lots of information about how biological design tools can genuinely help different areas of human life, including in general life science research, disease surveillance, vaccine development, biosecurity capacity, food security as well. And so yeah, there's a bit of a balance that we're faced with here. The risks are serious, but there's also clear opportunities as well. Yeah. Next slide. Right. So Article 10 promises equitable technology transfer, also calls for, has this vision of cooperation between countries. And however, the implementation has often fallen short of the vision. For instance, export control regimes usually frequently serve as de facto barriers to the ability of Global South countries to obtain and use, take advantage of these kinds of technologies. And then that has effectively led to a perception of gatekeeping going on. On top of that, many Global South countries are also struggling with the usual challenges of under-resourced missions in places like Geneva, limited travel funding, very few experts in the jurisdictions themselves, and this just makes it a lot harder for them to participate effectively, to try and take advantage of Article 10, or to even think of how to request for the kinds of assistance that Article 10 um, is supposedly meant to allow. Next slide. Thank you. So, biological technology design tools, which biological tools equipped with frontier AI, as I have already said, would offer significant opportunities, but also pose significant risks, as my fellow panelists have described in detail. So, I guess the big question is, how do we ensure that the weaknesses and failures of Article 10, as it stands, are not carried forward, while also ensuring that the new unique critical risks that frontier AI BTs present are mitigated sufficiently, and that's what I'm going to try and say something about in the final part of my presentation. So, next slide. So, my suggested way forward is first, I think the countries that make up the BWC, signed and ratified the BWC, just need to recommit themselves to finding a fair and balanced path forward. I guess unfortunately it seems like it's less of a it's a world in which multilateralism is less and less important. But I think there's still an opportunity, and the opportunity that this rethinking presents is a good moment to just recommit to a fair and balanced path forward. More concretely, I'd say that we need more targeted capacity building. So um, I found, for instance, that there has been in the past a BWC sponsorship program that was helpful to a range of global South countries, where they brought a bunch of experts from those countries to learn more about biological biological weapons and biological tools. I think that kind of thing should be better funded. And I noticed that the number of people who are able to participate were few. And I think sorry, my bad. That's the cost. Sorry, that's the cost. The ISU's cost on capacity building. They've had a cost before, and but then the number of people who were able to participate from different global South countries was still fairly few. I think it would be really great if that kind of thing is funded more significantly and brings more people together more frequently as well. So the other thing I was talking about is a BWC sponsorship program, which, in my understanding, allows poorly resourced global South countries to participate more effectively. And the point I'm making here is that I think that kind of project should also be funded more. I think, yeah. So I think those kinds of things would allow global South countries to participate more effectively. Yes, so that's the first thing. The second thing I'd say is partnerships between states and groups of states. So it doesn't have to be states alone. It could be groups of states, and it could also be frontier AI companies. So I have what I'm suggesting here is not new. In the early 2000s, I found out that the BWC allowed like pharmaceutical companies to get involved in questions on verification. So industry was very deeply involved in questions of figuring out a verification regime. I think this rethinking that's going on allows gives us another opportunity to involve the leading AI companies in figuring out how to bring Article 10 to life. They have the people who have the expertise, they have the resources, and I think yeah, we should think about how exactly we can involve them. Now, I have two suggestions here. First is the obvious one, which is capacity building. They have the experts. The experts could get engaged in the kinds of courses the ISU plans. I think it's also possible to have to maintain some kind of technological access regime that works through mediated access. And that's the last point I'm making. And so this would be something like we give you access, but it's carefully monitored and it's carefully managed by these kinds of companies that are the frontier of these kinds of tech and the kind of research that's going on. So that's my presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecil. I think that we have a lot to learn from the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, because as you said, they are one of the ones that work very well with industry, and I've seen the engagement from very close. So it's a path that we could take a look and also try to perhaps imitate, but then adapt it to the BWC. But also what I hear from your presentation is that capacity gaps in frontier AI and biosecurity are not only a development issue, but of course they are a preventive one, suggesting that cooperation and assistance under Article 10 may be increasingly relevant to reducing systemic biosecurity risks. So thank you all for your presentations. I think I'm going to start with one of the questions from the audience that says that as frontier AI systems begin to shape pathogen design, detection, and response, where do you see the BWC most structurally unprepared? Will it be verification, information sharing, or implementation support? And which of those gaps is realistically addressable in the next 24 months? That's one question. The other question will be, is the EU AI Act linked currently or in the future with the EU Biotoxin Act that is coming out? And then I will also like to add two more questions, perhaps for Cecile. What kinds of cooperation or assistance would be most effective from a biosecurity perspective rather than simply transferring technology? And perhaps to Hamza, are there specific types of discussions or exercises that could help address within the BWC the issues that you brought up? So I give the floor to perhaps Frederick. You would like to start?
Yes, happy to start with this one. So ask for the AI Act's relationship with any other union legislation. That is obviously something that we are concerned with, and without revealing too much of the internal cuisine of the Commission, we get consulted on these files, and we then work with the colleagues to make sure that there is a consistent and coherent application of the law, and overlaps are appropriately managed. So that is definitely part of our scope. And then maybe as regards the question on what are the most pertinent gaps and how could they possibly be addressed? I think one thing that one challenge that the biosecurity community at large just faces in the next 24 months with regards to AI, possibly sooner than 24 months, is the challenge that open source models are around 6 months behind the frontier now, and all the safeguards we are aware of to date can be very easily removed from those. So one thing that I would really love to see coming out of the expert community is more takes on how do we think about biosecurity in a world in which, sure, legislation such as the EU AI Act can force closed source providers to implement safeguards that do to some extent work, but they often cannot force open source developers to do similar things. And even if they can, such safeguards are easily removed. It takes half an hour of work and a couple of cents in compute to remove safeguards from open source models these days. And jailbroken models are available with just a few clicks online, even for non-expert users. So that's the situation that we deal with. And I think that either needs a new perspective on mitigations that could work in the open source field, or it needs a fundamental rethinking about open source as it regards to AI bio. And the conversation about that in the community needs to be led and facilitated and accelerated by someone. And I think the BWC could provide one of the fora for this.
Thank you. Hamza?
Yeah, I think it's my job is somewhat easier here because I'm just making the claim that people aren't thinking about this. So thinking about this would be step one. The more substantive recommendation would be and I'm curious for other folks' thoughts here as well, is trying to understand why we continue to stovepipe different parts of the biological problem. So whether that's for regional or domestic regulators like the EU, or whether that's for international organizations, or whether that's for safety reports like the one that came out last week, I just continue to see that informational threats are treated as distinct from biological threats or cyber threats when they're intrinsically germane to every single one of those threat models, right? Like we could move out of bio and just talk about cyber attack on critical infrastructure, and the exact same influence model would apply, which is muddy the waters, make attribution hard, cripple the response, and then make recovery hard over the next few months. So the high level recommendation here is fairly easy, which is talk to malign influence experts. Some of the best experts in the world are here in DC, but there's many of them across the world that I talk to, that we talk to. So step one here would just be the working group consultations shouldn't just include technical experts and security experts, but we need to start taking the information threat seriously. The second thing, and this is a harder thing to do over the next 24 months, is investigating how crisis response coordination is possible in low fidelity information environments. In other words, if the BWC is getting stakeholders together because something bad has happened in the world, how can we make sure the information coming from there is accurate? And I think that requires working with folks on the technology side to make sure that there's no information spoofing happening. And I think that's just a generational challenge, not just for bio, but for other threats as well.
Thank you. Over to you, Brian.
Sure. I would like to start by saying that I agree with all of my fellow panelists on their recommendations so far. Specifically, the need to build risk monitoring mechanism, level of boom, suggested by Frederica. Second, crisis preparedness during or right of boom, suggested by Hamza. And also, third, we need targeted capacity building for the Global South by Cecile. So perhaps one thought would be the need on building resilience of our current biodefense choke points. In particular, synthesis screening currently relies primarily on sort of a best match algorithms, right? Identifying sequences against a national or international database of known pathogens. But AI-assisted design could potentially enable the creation of novel or optimized sequences that have a similar hazardous function, but remains distinct enough to evade current detection. And I think that effectively creates a gap, a kind of stealth pathogens that could bypass some of the traditional oversight mechanisms. And to maintain the effectiveness of these mechanisms, I think we could explore two approaches. One is shifting from sequence matching to functional screening. And the second, also integrating the use of AI tools to strengthen the automated review of synthesis orders. And some of these tools could potentially be leveraged to facilitate capacity building as well, ensuring that state parties in the Global South also have the technical infrastructure to participate in these global standards.
Thank you. Over to you, Cecile.
Yes. Thank you. So out of the list that was given, I think to me verification and information sharing seem like the most super important ones, but also the most challenging at the same time. I mean, I'm just looking back at how hard it has been to get the verification protocol through. And I think that's going to be really challenging. Both are particularly challenging because of the political will. I think that you will need. I think the one that's within touching distance in like 24 months seems to me to be implementation support. I think I guess if you have some kind of agreement, then implementation support seems more a question of resource availability, and I think that's a little bit easier to do than the others. And with regards to the other question you asked, which was about the kinds of cooperation or assistance that might be most effective, apart from transferring technology, I think, my sense of Global South countries is just that there's interest, but then the knowledge base and the fact that people are just busy with so many other problems means it's difficult to make any progress on some of these things. So I think um, just knowledge sharing, training on questions of risks and questions of opportunities would make a big difference. You don't have to transfer the technology. And I think just to add on to this, I think that if you are going to do it, you should do it carefully. You shouldn't do it once in 2 years. You should do it carefully. You should do it for a long period of time. You should select participants in a very like you should take your time to select the right participants, not just ask a government to give you the people who you should have, and so on and so forth. But I think that's, to me, an easy one that that someone should do something about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. We have another group of questions. One is about how much of the AI-enabled influence related to biological weapons is really new? Or is it a case of faster, easier, more powerful, and cheaper routes to mis and disinformation linked to bioweapons? Another question is, in light of the explosion of AIs, what ethical approaches are being developed to prevent these tools from overpowering humanity? And the third question will be, what do the panelists think of the ideational impacts in making discussions of bioweapon potentials more prominent and making potential actors see use of bioweapons as being more acceptable? So, shall we start with Friederike?
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of the discussion making the thing more likely to happen and also seem more acceptable, I think this really depends on who starts the discussion and how it's framed. And the BWC has an outstanding comparative advantage to start such a discussion in a frame where it's very clear that it's not acceptable at all. While I'm personally very worried about this, and I think many actors should be, I think the BWC has a unique position to start the debate from a stance of very clearly this is very unacceptable. Also I'm hoping can rely on the expertise that is needed to make sure that whatever does get communicated in the public sphere does not meaningfully add to what is out there anyway already. So I would be somewhat optimistic on that angle, while acknowledging that it is, of course, a key concern. Sorry, can you repeat the other question, maybe?
It's okay, Frederica. I think because I'm taking look of time, maybe I pass it with Hamza for now. Thank you.
Sure, so I'm going to repeat Frederica's request to repeat the question. You're muted.
One question was related about the ethical component, right? Since we are looking at all the challenges, and maybe some people are wondering about what are the root problem. Maybe ethical issue is one of those root problems and potential solutions. So I think that our audience, our participant was wondering what's the role of the ethical. I mean, you talk about codes of conduct, Friederike. I wonder if there are any other tools that we can use and how much importance perhaps we should be given to the ethical part at the convention.
I think that question kind of lands on what we mean by ethical here. But just taking this like generally, I would probably make a couple of points. So I think the first is at some point we just have to have some ethical guidance around, to Brian's earlier point, how we use high risk biological data for the training of AI models. I actually just generally think this is an ethical dilemma because to Cecil's point about countries which are still undercapacitated on the biological tech stack, having a lot of that data in there is actually quite helpful for a lot of those countries. Those countries will become increasingly reliant on a more AI-based tech stack. And I find that trade-off to be quite hard. So I think what the BWC can do is set up an ethical guidance which helps guide or consult with those countries to figure out where is that risk ratio in particular. Because I don't think that question is as clear-cut for me as maybe for some other folks on the panel. I think the second question is around privacy. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough in a security context, which is a larger and larger tract of the data that the models are trained on is increasingly coming from people's personal biological data, which is to say, de-anonymized healthcare data, de-anonymized, sometimes reproductive access data, which just gets churned into the model and then yields responses. And I think there's ethical dilemmas there, which yield security problems. For instance, biological weapons targeting specific communities or biological weapons targeting specific individuals. So those are the two big questions I would be thinking about for ethical guidelines.
Thank you. If Brian or Cecil would like to take the floor, or otherwise I go to the next question. Okay. So some weeks ago, oh yes, Brian, go ahead.
Just one quick thought. I think, currently the private AI companies are defining their own risk threshold and potential red lines for what is acceptable to be released or trained. But I think it's important that there is public interests being accounted either by government or by international bodies like the BWC. So I think there is an opportunity to help define what might be potential international red lines and potential risks that are unacceptable for national and global security. And that could be defined at the level of the ultimate harm and potentially, in terms of the level of defenses that current models have, and potentially at the more upstream level in terms of data sets, while also making sure that there is beneficial applications, right?
Thank you so much. A week ago, we were looking at the latest version of the working paper from the chair, and all of you know more or less where the current discussion is at the moment. So if you could improve the current draft on one recommendation related to frontier AI, what will it be? Or alternatively, where do you see the most promising entry point for the convention to remain forward-looking while staying within its mandate? Perhaps we can start again with Friederike.
Sorry, I had a bit of a glitch in my connection, so I didn't catch the beginning of the question. It's a forward-looking way for the BWC to implement its mandate.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the current draft that is being negotiated,
Okay.
if it's one part that you would like to improve, or if
yeah.
then yeah.
Okay.
Over to
Yes.
you.
So, among that draft, and I mean, I had this a little bit hinting at this in my slides. I think I struggle to remember what you call it, but the expert group you bring together seems like it's very focused on bio expertise, and it seems like it only meets very rarely and for very short amounts of times. Just from my experience on facilitating the process for the drawing up of the code of practice, I would strongly recommend having maybe a smaller subgroup as a more standing organ that meets more regularly, that gives people more surface area, more time together in the same room. Because otherwise you will always just spend 95% of the meeting catching everyone up to the same point and then 5% stating the obvious, and then you'll be done. So if there's any meaningful, novel or transformative takes to come out of this, I do think it would have to be a smaller forum, and it would have to meet more regularly and possibly in person. We found those interactions really valuable. It's not fashionable to say this these days, but yes, putting people in the same room really helps. And having that in smaller groups and for longer, and with this interdisciplinary expertise, I think that would be my top wish for an update.
Thank you, Friederike. Hamza?
Yeah, I think I would give like a modified version of Frederica's suggestion, where I think it's both true that more interaction in person with smaller groups help, and also that we need different small groups, right? So I think it's the case that there's too many biological experts there. I think that's true. I think there's often a lot of international security experts there. So these are people coming from political science backgrounds. They've worked somewhat on disarmament or arms control or verification. And those tend to be the two big groups. I just think we need other smaller groups. We need people, like I was saying, to plug my own presentation, working on influence. But if you want people on influence, you need people who were working on sociology, people who come from an economics background, people who come from a law background. Frankly, people who come from an international development background who don't tend to be in a lot of the BWC conversations. Because realistically, if we do see an AI-enabled pathogen be deployed in the next 5 years, the highest risk cases here are not in the United States or in most of Europe. We're looking at the highest risk cases being somewhere in the global south. And having some discussions about how those institutions can adapt to those changes, not just informationally, as I was talking about, but also politically, economically, and socially, just means that, to Frederica's point, we do need more work. We do need small groups. We need more interaction. But the kind of person who attends them, I think, also has to expand and change.
Thank you. Brian?
I think it would be useful to strengthen the capacity to do horizon scanning and early warning. The types of AI models that I mentioned in the presentation is what has happened in the last few years, but things would change again in the next few years, right? For example, the increasing integration of different tools, specifically with the use of AI agents. Another trend might be the higher levels of lab optimization. For instance, leading companies and labs are already developing what is called AI sciences that could use cloud labs and robotics to automate parts of the scientific processes. And this type of optimization could be one of the key trend that overcomes some of the current bottlenecks in the kind of build, test, learn cycle in the life sciences. And so ideally, we have an international expert panel or a observatory that publish these regular assessments of trends and also their global biosecurity implications.
Thank you, Cecil.
Yeah, so I was encouraged to see something about an international biosecurity education network, which is really concrete, and I liked that. Yeah, I guess I would recommend deepening that. So, as I understand it, it's supposed to be just for biosecurity courses, but I'm keen to see like more specialized knowledge sharing of that nature with I guess policymakers or like experts at the frontier in global south countries and not just for anyone studying biosecurity anywhere. Yeah, but I was encouraged to see that in honestly. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you to all. So now we're going to pass to the last section of the webinar, which will be concluding remarks, where we ask you to share with us what is upcoming for your organization, something that is relevant to the BWC. I'm sure our audience will also like to know what's going on for 2026, your priorities perhaps. And in the meantime, I also want to tell our audience that thanks to your feedback, we can do the webinars better and better. So my colleagues are going to be sharing the link to collect feedback on the chat. Please take some minutes to let us know. And let's start again with Friederike for your concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure being here with you today and hearing all the thoughtful questions. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity and for the existence of this group. Yeah, in terms of conclusions, I think the thing that I'm going to leave you with is maybe the thing I said in the beginning already. Remember how much the enforcement of any globally existing rules depends on what gets said in the public sphere. So you have the chance to really give the existing rules that are there around frontier AI, you have the chance to give them teeth. They do not have teeth on their own. The fact that these rules exist in some places now and may come to exist in other places does not mean the battle is won. It means the situation has, the door has opened, and it's your and other global expert forums job to give the regulations teeth. So please do that.
Thank you, Hamza.
I think first I'll just say what I say every time I interact with the BWC, usually in Geneva and not over a Zoom call, which is please help financially support the ISU, the Biological Weapons Convention. If you're listening and you have a checkbook, I don't think 4.5 people are sufficient to stop all the biological threats in the world. So that would be my first recommendation, and I will continue to say that. I think the second is, and this is just sort of reflecting on this conversation and how sometimes it can seem a one-sided is while diplomats and those folks working at UNODA definitely need to learn from experts coming in from a security background, from a biological background. I think experts have to do the exact same thing. I was reflecting on some of the recommendations that all of us were giving to the additions to the working group paper. And how many of those are realistic is sort of an open question. So I think one thing that would be really interesting for us to explore over the next year is how the group of experts who are doing these technical briefings are first briefed on what the BWC can and can't do. And I think that will help us capacitate our recommendations, make them much more relevant. And finally, I'll just say thank you for coming. I work at an organization which has more than 50 people who are focused on policy work in the EU, in the UK, in the United States, also in interactions diplomatically with China and many other parts of the world. So if you have any questions around our policy work, frankly, if you're looking for support for your work from our grant making arm, please let us know. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, Brian.
I'm very grateful for the work that is happening at the BWC community, and it's always incredible to me that such a small team at the implementation unit is tackling such a big mission for the world. So thank you. I think my final recommendation would be to strengthen our collective readiness by integrating AI-specific emergencies and contingency scenarios into our emergency response plans. So last year, China officially updated its national emergency response plan to include AI disasters as a distinct category, alongside issues like natural disasters and also infectious diseases and pandemics. And to identify the specific vulnerabilities, Concordia AI has hosted a scenario planning exercise with partners like Tsinghua University, Oxford University, and also Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And when we model a global pandemic that is triggered by an actor utilizing a frontier AI biological model, the exercise just demonstrated so clearly that our current national and international architectures are not ready at all for the speed and novelty of such a threat. So I urge state bodies to use the quantitative mechanisms to conduct some of these multi-stakeholder tabletop exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Cecil?
Yeah, I'm going to say that security and fairness are connected, and it's important that we don't give up on the fairness goals that are envisioned in provisions like Article 10. I'm also going to say that global South countries need to get more involved into these questions, and finally, I run the ELINA program, and ELINA program is dedicated to helping African countries figure out questions on AI safety and AI security. So if anyone here is anyone is from an African country and you need support, we're really looking forward to. We really want to help you. Yeah, the ELINA program. Thank you.
Thank you to all, and we will keep up with our science diplomacy efforts. I think, as you mentioned, on one hand, the diplomats want to learn more about the technical part, and on the other hand, the experts want to learn more about the diplomacy and what is happening at the convention. So our hope is that we will be able to bring you in person at some point, and then this bridge can be built in person as well. So with that, I would like to thank all of our speakers and all to the audience as well for joining us online. I would also like to thank Unidir team who supported the production of the event. And the event and the series is being funded through support from the United States. Thank you so much. And before closing, a reminder to go to the link and give us some feedback. Have a good afternoon here in Geneva, or a good day or night, depending on where the event finds you online. See you next time. Thank you.